being here. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. So yeah, I'm a Stoic from Poland. So I do believe this is my wonderful PowerPoint minimalistic presentation. I do believe it makes sense that I'm close to the end of the speaker list, because I won't be preaching Stoicism. I won't be talking about the basics. I will try to, on a more theoretical level, I believe, than Dan did in his great presentation. I will try to talk about I'll try to refute certain misunderstandings about Stoicism, and I believe it will answer certain questions that have been made here, or I'll just try to answer them. So I believe that they are two, just as the presentation says, they are two quite popular misinterpretations, misunderstandings of Stoicism, and I do believe they are, I call them the ascetic misinterpretation and the conservative misinterpretation. I will discuss them one by one, and I do believe they are misinterpretations, that is, they are false or at least slightly mistaken misreadings of Stoicism, and they distort our understanding of what Stoicism is. But I do believe that in saying this, I'm not arguing against any particular author. I do not think that there is one person kind of responsible for kind of making these misinterpretations popular. It's just that this kind of ambiguous situation a bit. I believe that those ascetic and conservative threads in our conversation on Stoicism kind of pop up here and there all the time. So for this reason, it is important to draw a line so that we know what we are talking about. This is basically the concept of my talk. So the first one, the ascetic misinterpretation, is the idea that the way of life the Stoics promote is an ascetic one, that it is a life of renunciation, abstemiousness, and austerity. I'm not using the word minimalism here, so that we are clear with Dan on this one. According to the ascetic misinterpretation, if someone wants to be a Stoic, then she is obliged to quash her desires, limit herself to little, and be satisfied with little, which is not the same as minimalism, but here we go. She who wants to live according to the ascetic misinterpretation of Stoicism is obliged to live simply and frugally, to restrict herself to plain and modest food and drink, to abstain from alcohol and drugs of any sort, to moderate her sexual life or abandon it altogether. In a word, in all kinds of carnal delectations, she is obliged to limit her pleasures to the simplest ones, or even to learn how to find pleasure in renouncing pleasure. So the ascetic misinterpretation would be what I have just described, or some kind of a combination of the notions I mentioned. In Michel's Foucault language, the ascetic misinterpretation can be expressed in terms of quote-unquote training through deprivation. And my point is that while it is perfectly fine and necessary for a Stoic to train herself in privation, it just happens way too often in our conversation of Stoicism these days that those exercises in abstinence, or quote-unquote making oneself familiar with the minimum, are taken as a tantamount to Stoicism as a whole. So it is true that the Stoics compel us to exercise in being content with little and so on, but it is not true that this kind of exercise is all that they can offer. So my idea is that as long as we read the Stoics in a superficial way, as long as we do not go deeper, it is kind of possible that we are misled into this either ascetic or conservative misinterpretation. And my idea is that we should kind of get to the bottom of the thing, and not just stop on the kind of common sense superficial level. But I do believe at the same time that those folks who fall for either misinterpretation, they should be easily forgiven, because there is logic which makes, and there are certain reasons that make those misinterpretations popular, and the logic which makes that they are even out there. Unfortunately, I won't dwell on that because we don't have time, so I'll skip to the meat of my argument, that is to the specific arguments which make, in my view, the ascetic misinterpretation and the conservative misinterpretation misinterpretations. That is why they are wrong, or at least inaccurate. And I believe that the first argument against the ascetic misinterpretation comes from the area of Stoic axiology. As you probably know at this point already, the Stoic view on values is that the outside things, the things that are not in our power, material, external, outside things, are completely indifferent. They are of no intrinsic value. They have no positive value, no negative value, just plain number 0. And it is only us as human beings, as moral agents, that we are able to work that material, and we are able to make it something positively or negatively valuable. And of course, there is a long string of various metaphors here. The best one, probably the brick metaphor, that is bricks like the building material, which is just, as I said, raw building material, which has no intrinsic value in itself. It is only us, or at least architects, that are able to turn this material, this input raw material of no value, into something which is, for example, a beautiful building or a poorly built building. So it is not the matter of the input matter, so to speak. It is the matter of what we do about that. It is the work we do. It is the outcome that matters. And this is one of the key things in Stoicism. Our moral situation, so to speak, doesn't hinge on the material we're given, but it hinges on the work we do upon that material. What it follows from this is that we are not obliged, it is not necessary for us to always reduce this input material to a narrow ascetic situation. So while it is to use dance, to make a link to dance presentation, it is of course perfectly understandable that a Stoic might want to live a minimalistic life to kind of reduce this this amount of input material for the moral action. But I believe it is not necessary for every Stoic to do that every time, right? Because, as I said, it is not the matter of what input material we have, it is not the matter of how much of that material we have, but it is the matter of what we do about it. It is the matter of Stoicism is more like about wise or smart management of what we have than about what we do have on the input side. That would be the first most important argument, I believe. The second argument, from a completely different perspective, again from the again against the ascetic misinterpretation. There is this argument against asceticism as such, and the argument goes basically like this: if I am a worldly person, so to speak, if I live an interesting life, if I travel a lot, if I have a big footprint, if I'm going places, if I have many friends, if I do things, and so on, there is wide diversity of ways in which I can do that. There's a million ways of living such a life. But if I decide to live an ascetic life, for example, like monks in a monastery do, who live their quiet lives of prayer and renunciation, there is only one way to do that, right? So, and this would be the thing, that all the ascetics live actually the same life. Maybe not, I'm not saying it's a boring life, but it is a very one-track, single-minded way of life. While if I live outside of the monastery, there is a wealth of material. The world is broad and wide, and there is a variety of options in front of me. And now, I do not believe that this argument is sound as such, as an argument against asceticism in general, but I do believe, because it's a kind of a rough, heavy-handed argument, right? This argument doesn't account for the possible diversity of spiritual lives of those monks in the monastery, right? But the interesting point is that once we apply this argument against, not against asceticism as such, but against the ascetic misinterpretation of Stoicism, I believe this argument gains its power, because, as we know, the Stoics are materialists. They want us to live and flourish and thrive in this world, in this life, on this earth, not in some kind of a vague, transcendent life that we escape to. So the Stoic model of life is about living the life here in this world, not about escaping from it in some kind of a transcendent way. Therefore, this argument would, I believe, make sense against against the ascetic misinterpretation of Stoicism. So it was a bit of a theoretical argument. So now the practical argument number 3, more practical argument, an argument that basically goes like this. We humans of the 21st century, we have, so to speak, more to lose than the ancients had. Our modern life is more complex than the life of people in past centuries was, and we live in a much more interconnected universe than they did. Because, for example, we have our mobile technology, which basically means, as I said, that we are more interconnected. So let's take an example. If I am, let's take an ancient Roman Stoic. If he decides that he wants to live a ascetic life, a private life at his home, it is in a way easy for him or her to do so, because all she has to do is she has to stay at home, stay put, don't go into forum, she doesn't engage in a political discussion, and she's perfectly okay to live a life at home with her family and friends and so on, a simple private life. Now the problem is that we in the 21st century, it's a bit more difficult because we have those things. We have our mobile phones, we have internet, and so on and so on. And I do know that there are some fans, some anti-fans of technology here. But the thing is that one, of course, may say that it is perfectly possible for us to go offline, to get rid of mobile phones, and so on and so on and so on. And of course, it is possible technically, but, and it is a very big but, if I actually get rid of my mobile phone, if I actually go offline, this would put me in a position where I just can't live my life at all. For example, I wouldn't be able to do my job. I wouldn't be able to talk to my students. I wouldn't be able to talk to my clients. I wouldn't be able to do actually anything. I would just be able to, sit down and do nothing. Life of not just renunciation, but resignation. And this is something I do not believe the ancient Stoic wanted us to do. So this argument that today in the more interconnected world it's much harder for us to resign and renounce whatsoever is another argument against ascetic misinterpretation. The final one, the direct textual evidence, the ancient Stoic themselves, if we read them carefully, there are passages in their works where they where they specifically argue against overly ascetic reading of Stoicism. For example, we have Seneca who says, quote unquote, "I prefer to show myself in public dressed in woolen and in robes of office rather than with naked shoulders and cut on my feet," end of quote. And this very fact that the ancient Stoics were aware that people may misread their teaching in a overly ascetic way, and the very fact that they argued against it, that they warned us not to do that, it is an argument against that proves my point that Stoicism and asceticism are not the same thing. Stoicism is something much bigger and much more complex and universal and sophisticated than asceticism as such. And the same goes with the conservative misreading. The other misinterpretation, the conservative misinterpretation, and just for the record, I'm using the word conservative here in a quite broad and wide meaning, basically including the political stuff, but not only, also the personal attitude to life, and so on and so on. So the word conservative here means basically willing to preserve, sustain, support the present condition and status of basically everything that we experience in life and the world in itself. So the conservative misinterpretation would mean something like that. Everything is good the way it is. Whatever has been established and settled has been established and settled for good. There is no need to alter or ameliorate anything. The best is the enemy of the good. Change is a threat, not a hope. Bringing about any change in the world is above our human pay grade. We are impotent to do it. We have no authority to do it. And if we try nevertheless, a disaster will result. We are not supposed to undertake any reforming or revolutionary endeavor, and to try to amend the world would mean ungratefulness to the power greater than ourselves, the power, the greater power, however we understand or however we do not understand it, which set the world on its track. So this would be the outline of conservative misinterpretation, and importantly, it has a personal aspect. That is, the overly conservative reading of Stoicism can, in the private personal life, it can turn into kind of a resignation, giving up, in which we just sit down, give up, do nothing, because we are overwhelmed with this feeling that things are not up to us and we have no control whatsoever on anything. And I truly believe this is obviously not something that the ancient Stoics wanted us to do again. And because Stoicism is an act, is a philosophy of activity, is a philosophy of engagement, and is a philosophy of actually doing things, I believe, in the best possible way, not resigning, not giving up, and so on and so on. So the question is, what are the arguments here? The core argument against conservative misinterpretation of Stoicism rests on the so-called world stage metaphor. The world stage metaphor, which is basically the idea that we humans are basically players on the stage of the world, and we are it is not up to us what we are forced and supposed to play. We are only able to play the role that we are assigned. I call it the rule of 5A: accept assignment and act ably. And the problem with this idea is that it is very conservative, because if it turns out that if I find out that I'm born a slave, then it follows that I need to live a slavish life and just do my Stoic duty. And any kind of rebellion, revolution, or emancipation is just out of picture. It's just not there, because I need to do what I was born and supposed to do. And now, a few years back, Dr. Stevens, who is present here, and I'd like to extend thanks for that, said one thing to me that kind of proved to open a very interesting avenue of interpretation for me. The thing is that basically in this world stage metaphor, it is like oversimplified. It is not the case that all the parts that we play in life, that all the parts available to human beings are on a par with each other. There are some parts that we can play and with some parts that we are born into are truly kind of this metaphysical fixed situation that cannot be changed. If I'm a father or a brother to someone, or if I'm a human being for that matter, or if I'm a disabled person, if I'm born with some kind of incurable condition, this is truly something that is totally not up to me, and this is truly something that cannot be changed. If I'm a brother to someone, then no matter what happens, no matter if I die, if my sibling dies, I will always be that brother. It's not something that I decided, it's not something I can decide to stop. But there are other parts. For example, if I'm a U.S. president, yes, this means that I was elected to the office. It's not like in the United Kingdom where I'm a king or a queen, but I was elected to this role. And theoretically, I can resign the office of the presidency, just of course hypothetically and with no link to any particular political situation. It is a not role which is necessarily, hopefully, for life. I can resign if I am a Polish citizen, but I can resign. I can renounce my Polish citizenship. I can apply for British citizenship or American citizenship, and so on and so on. The same on the job market. I can apply for that job or another, circumstances permitting, of course. So here is the thing: certain roles are not for life, are not fixed metaphysically, but are much more elective. Thanks again to William for making this comment to me. And this reading, this kind of a two-step reading, which focuses not on the assignment itself, but kind of on the contract side, right? I'm the president, so I play according to the rules of being a president, theoretically, as long as I am the president. If I do not want to do that anymore, then circumstances permitting, I can resign. And there is textual evidence for this reading in Epictetus, for example, quote unquote, "In the Saturnalia, a king is chosen by lot, for it has been the custom to play at this game. The king commands, you drink, you mix the wine, you sing, you come, you go. I obey so that the game may not be broken up through me." End of quote. So this is this idea. As long as I am satisfied with the game, I can play it. But if circumstances permit that I resign, I can resign with certain roles. And this fresh reading of this world stage metaphor, I believe, provides an argument for a reading of Stoicism which is much less conservative than it seems at first blush. If we read it just, as I said, in the superficial way, it may seem that if I'm born a slave, then I have to do this slavish duty and be a slave forever. But it is not the only reading possible. And the same thing goes with the argument number 2, that is the dichotomy of control. I assume again that you at this point already know what it is, because the superficial reading of dichotomy of control may lead us into this kind of a resignational conclusion that if I first divide the things in the world into things that are not in my power and in my power, and then if I focus on the things in my power, there might be the problem, because it will turn out that 99.999% of the things in the world are not in my power, which basically means that there is very little I can control, which can be understood as an obligation to just, again, sitting down, doing nothing, resigning, giving up, because nothing in the world is fully up to me. And obviously and sincerely, this is not what the Stoics meant, in my interpretation at least, because, and this is the point here, this dichotomy of control can be reversed, right? We first decide what my goal and value in life is. For example, if I want to go with a grand plan of like changing the world or changing the political system for a more just or a more sustainable, I can perfectly decide upon that, and only then I decide what in this is in my power and what is not in my power. Just as Epictetus says, quote unquote, everything has two handles, the one by which it may be borne, the one by which it may not, end of quote. So I first decide what I want to do, and then I consider what in this big project is in my control and what is it not. And once we apply this way of thinking, it turns out that there is much more for us to deal with in the world. We don't have to give up, we don't have to sit down, we don't have to do nothing. There is a wide diversity of things that we may engage with. And I was trying to craft this argumentation so that each problem is attacked from a few angles. So with yet different take, one may argue against the conservative misinterpretation using the Nuremberg defense argument, which is serious stuff, but the idea is that the concept that we have no authority whatsoever in the assignment of the roles we play effectively translates into the concept that whatever we do, we simply follow superior orders and subordinate ourselves to preordained decisions, with all the consequences that follow. If I'm born a slave, again, I have to do my slave duty, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the problem is that this reading heavily relies on this elusive and superhuman higher power which had assigned the roles. This can be called logos, this can be called fate, nature, depending on the interpretation. But whatever it is, this way of thinking takes the responsibility off human shoulders and dispatches it somewhere to the vague beyond. Embracing this view means abdication from responsibility for ourselves, for our deeds, and for the world. And my understanding of this is that for the free-spirited Stoics of antiquity, this might have been okay. But from the point of view of the 21st century, with the legacy of the 20th century, with the experiences of Auschwitz, Kolyma, Rwanda, and other places, we know all too well, what the results of such renunciation of responsibility are. And this kind of escape from responsibility is something that we shouldn't consent to too easily. So this kind of a argument from the consequences. And finally, the final argument, again, yet different take and a bit unorthodox, but important to me personally, and it also shows that it's not a coincidence that I'm talking about these two misinterpretations together, because there is a shared ground, there is a kind of a entanglement between the two. So let's imagine, let's take an example. Let's imagine a world which is in which, let's say, economy is in bad shape. A world in which young people can't find jobs, can't start successful careers, can't pay the bill, a world in which which is not sustainable. With greetings to Kai if he's here still. A world in which, like, say, 1% of the world's population owns 3/4 of world's wealth, and so on and so on and so on. Let's imagine, of course, hypothetically, purely hypothetically, let's imagine such a world, and let's also imagine a Stoic living in this world. And the point is that if this Stoic follows either the ascetic or the conservative misinterpretation of Stoicism, she won't be in a position to protest against this situation. Let's imagine that there is a street protest and people are carrying a banner saying, this situation is shitty, the economy is bad, let's improve that, let's get more sustainable, let's restore good economy, let's restore sustainability, and so on, and so on, and so on. The thing is that if our Stoic follows the ascetic misinterpretation, she wouldn't support such a protest because she would be content with the little earnings she does and with the shitty job she has, and she would be saying that she would be thinking that this is just okay. On the other hand, if she follows the conservative misinterpretation, she wouldn't support such a protest because she would think that what once has been established, that the economy is good, the wealth distribution is such, and so on, must be so forever, and hence all protest is pointless. And therefore, fuel for social progress, for any development, would be impaired in such a situation. And this is, I believe, the common ground shared by the ascetic and conservative misinterpretation, because no change in the world shall be demanded, the conservative part, because we are obliged to be satisfied with what we already have, the ascetic part. And again, this may seem unorthodox and kind of a practical and modern point of view, but just keep in mind that the ancient Stoics themselves paid significant attention to the social aspect of their philosophy. They used to, as a matter of fact, they used to attack Epicureans with the argument of the failed Epicurean state, saying basically that because of Epicurus's advocacy of seclusion and disinterest in social and political matters, Epicurean state must fail. Epicureans wouldn't be able to create any lasting society, any lasting coherent society, because no one would be interested in doing social and political duties. So the social aspect was important to the Stoics, and just note that if we apply the same argument here to the Stoics, then we would see that the Stoic state would collapse too. I mean, if, to be precise, if ascetic or conservative misinterpretation of Stoicism were universally adopted as philosophy of life, then the state would collapse, or at least the social development would be very seriously undermined. And this is something we cannot abstract from. This is something that was of importance to the Stoic, which makes, I believe, this argument valid. And we are getting close to 30 minutes, and I'm getting very close to the end, because that's what I intended to say. I believe that my bottom line here is clear. I do believe that Stoicism is much, in a way, wider, more universal philosophy than just narrow ascetic or conservative cases are. In a way, this is exactly what makes Stoicism, in my view, so interesting and so inspiring, that it goes beyond those narrow cases of asceticism or conservatism. That Stoic philosophy comprises and covers much more. And I also believe that this is not something that is against the intentions of the ancient Stoics. And this is something, this is kind of a nutshell of this argument. Fate permitting, there will be a book in next year published, authored by me, where you will be able to find kind of a more exhaustive account of this. I hope this was understandable and enjoyable, at least to a degree. Thank you very much.